Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shadow Archives. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. When I was 13 years old, on the 15th of January in 2012, my world quietly collapsed without making a sound. That was the day they found my father dead in his apartment. He had been lying there for almost a month before anyone noticed. A whole month. I didn't understand what that really meant back then, not fully. I only knew that my father was gone and that he had been gone for a long time before the world decided to tell us. At that age, time feels strange. A month sounds long, but your brain can't really hold it. What stayed with me was the silence around it, the way adults spoke in low voices, and the feeling that something had already ended long before I was allowed to know about it. Only 4 days later, something else happened that sealed that time in my memory forever. My mother came back from a mammography screening. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, and before she even spoke, she started crying. Not quiet crying, but the kind where your face breaks and you can't stop it. I thought she was crying because of my father. She had been the one who got the call about him after all. I remember thinking that this was just delayed grief finally catching up with her. I remember everything about that moment. The table, the light, the smell of food. We were eating spaghetti bolognese. I can still see her tears falling slowly into the sauce, like the world had slowed down just for that moment. My stepfather was sitting next to me, quiet, saying nothing. I asked my mom if she was okay, not realizing what she was about to say. I was just a kid trying to be polite, trying to be normal in a moment that wasn't normal at all. She looked at me and told me they had found breast cancer in her right breast. That was it. No dramatic speech, no build-up. Just that sentence. I didn't even understand what it fully meant at first. Cancer was a word I had heard before, but it didn't feel real. Later, much later, I would find out that her chances of survival were only around 40%. At that moment, all I could do was stare past her, at the bookshelf behind her head. I remember the colors of the book covers, how sharp they looked, how my eyes locked onto them because I didn't know where else to look. The months that followed were heavy, in a way I didn't have words for back then. With more and more radiation, my mother lost all her hair. I watched it happen slowly, then all at once. One day her hair was thinner, the next day it was gone. She looked smaller without it, more fragile. But she survived. Somehow, she survived. People like to stop stories there at survival. They like to believe that surviving means things get better. But that was not the end. Not even close. There are 3 things from that time that still scare me today. They don't scare me in a horror movie way. They scare me quietly, the way memories creep up on you when you're alone. The first is my older brother. Today, he is addicted to drugs, but even back then, alcohol had already taken a strong hold on him. On New Year's Eve that year, just 2 weeks before we would get the message about my father, and only 2 weeks after my father had already died without us knowing, we celebrated together. My mom, my stepfather, my brother, his girlfriend, and a few friends were all in his apartment. Everyone was drinking, laughing, dancing. Everyone except me. I sat alone in the corner, bored, uncomfortable, watching drunk adults move around like strangers. My brother ignored me the entire evening, which wasn't unusual. He walked past me at one point, still not looking at me, still acting like I wasn't there. Then suddenly, he stopped. He turned around so fast it almost startled me. His eyes were wide, completely serious, and he stared straight into mine. He didn't smile. He didn't laugh. He just looked at me for a few seconds that felt much longer than they were. Then he said completely out of nowhere, "Call your father." I don't know why I did it. Maybe part of me hoped he would answer. I hadn't been in contact with my father for a while, but I wanted to rebuild something with him someday. I wanted the option to exist. So I called him. I listened as the phone rang and then switched to voicemail. I heard his recorded voice. That was the last time I ever heard it. Days later, we would find out he had already been dead, while my brother told me to call him. The second thing that haunts me is standing in the place where my father died. I went to his apartment after everything came out. I stood there knowing that this was where my blood came from, where my ancestor, my creator, had taken his last breaths. The couch terrified me the most. That was where he spent his last days. 49 years old, dead from organ failure. Alcohol had taken him piece by piece long before it finally finished the job. The third thing is the longest, the heaviest, and the one that shaped me the most. It is my stepfather and my mother's mental illness, and the way they wrapped around my childhood like a trap I couldn't escape. From around 2010 until 2017, our home was not a safe place. My stepfather assaulted, broke, and destroyed both me and my mother, emotionally and physically. Instead of supporting us, instead of changing, instead of apologizing, instead of leaving, instead of giving up alcohol, instead of stopping, he chose to drink every night. He worked as a waiter, which meant alcohol was always there, always easy to access. He usually came home around midnight. I learned to recognize his arrival without seeing him. The light would turn on in the hallway, shining through the small gap between my door and the floor. That light became a warning signal. After that came my mother's screams for help. Then came his screams, full of anger, then crying, then the sounds of glass breaking, or heavy furniture being thrown or falling. Sometimes the police came. Over time, even they stopped trying. I tried everything I could as a child. First, I fought against him, thinking strength would fix it. When that failed, I fought against my mother, because she was the one who always let him stay. Then I realized she was also a victim, and I found myself stuck in a horrible place where I loved her and hated her at the same time. The worst part was watching her lose all her hair because of cancer, while he kept abusing her anyway. She defended him, saying, "That's his way of dealing with this." Hearing that from her broke something inside me that never fully healed. Nobody cared about my mental health during those years. Not teachers, not family, not authorities. I was just expected to survive quietly, and somehow I did. All of this left deep marks inside me, but I still managed to graduate as the best student in my year. Shortly after that, I escaped. I moved to Australia, about 20,000 kilometers away from home. I am still here. People often ask what this story is supposed to mean. To me, it means that domestic violence is real. It happens every day, far more often than people like to believe. You never truly know what someone has lived through. You never really know. On the evening of my graduation, I was given the chance to hold a speech. I talked about the things we don't see, the things we ignore, the quiet suffering behind normal faces. It was my scream for help, even if I didn't call it that at the time. Nobody understood it. Everyone congratulated me. My mother left the room before I finished speaking. She knew exactly what I was talking about. I went to a small college in Pennsylvania in the mid-1980s, the kind of place that felt quiet and safe on the surface. It wasn't a big university with crowds and noise all night. It was smaller, more personal, the type of campus where people recognized faces even if they didn't know names. Back then, we truly believed we were protected just by being there. The buildings were old but well kept. The dorms felt like temporary homes, and most of us were young enough to still think bad things mostly happened somewhere else. That feeling started to crack during the spring semester of 1985. Word began to spread that there was a guy attacking women around campus. At first, the stories were vague. Someone had been mugged late at night. Someone else had been followed. Then it became clear this wasn't just rumor. This was real. Women were being targeted, and suddenly the campus didn't feel safe anymore. The worst part was how unprepared we were. Back then, we weren't allowed to have anything that could be considered a weapon. No mace, no pepper spray, nothing meant for self-defense. The rules were strict, and the idea was that the campus itself was supposed to be our protection. But when that illusion broke, we had to get creative. Quietly, without telling anyone official, we started figuring out what we could legally keep in our rooms that might help us if something went wrong. I slept with a metal nail file on my nightstand. It wasn't sharp in a dramatic way, but it was solid, and in my mind, that mattered. I also kept a huge can of hairspray right next to it. It was the 1980s, after all, and hairspray came in enormous cans back then. I told myself that if I had to, I could spray it in someone's eyes. Other girls did similar things. Some slipped metal forks from the dining hall into their pockets and hid them in drawers. Others kept heavy objects close to their beds. None of us talked about it openly, but we all knew. Fear has a way of creating silent agreements. That semester, by pure chance, I had been assigned my own dorm room. Normally, that would have felt like a luxury, privacy, quiet, space to myself. But once the attacks started happening, being alone in my room felt less like freedom and more like vulnerability. At night, every sound seemed louder. Every shadow felt suspicious. Before going to bed, I developed a routine. I checked my closet carefully, pulling back clothes to make sure no one was hiding there. I looked under the bed, even though I knew how ridiculous it felt. I locked the door and checked it twice. I made sure the windows were shut and latched. My nail file and hairspray were always on the nightstand within arm's reach. Phones were different back then, too. No speed dial like we're used to now. No cell phones. No easy way to call for help instantly. But I came up with a small trick that made me feel slightly safer. I would dial the phone number of our dorm counselor right before bed. These counselors were adults employed by the college, each living in an apartment within the dorms. They were there to help students, to handle problems, to be a bridge between us and the administration. Sort of like official older siblings. I would dial his number, let it ring once or twice, then hang up before he answered. That way, if something happened, I could just hit redial and reach him immediately. Even with all of that, fear never really left. It just settled in quietly. The night they finally caught the guy is burned into my memory. By then, everyone was on edge. We were all in our rooms for the night, trying to pretend things were normal, when we heard the door from the stairwell open. The sound echoed down the hallway in a way that felt wrong. Then came footsteps. Slow, shuffling, deliberate. And then we heard his breathing. It was heavy, wet, and disgusting. The kind of breathing you notice even when you're trying not to. He stopped at each door, one by one. I was sitting up on my bed, frozen, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. All the plans I had made in my head vanished. The nail file, the hairspray, the phone trick, none of it felt real anymore. Fear wiped my mind clean. When he stopped at my door, everything felt like it shrank down to that single moment. I could see his shoes through the crack under the door. They were close, too close. His breathing was right there on the other side of the wood. We had dry erase boards attached to the outside of our doors so we could leave each other messages. Voicemail wasn't common then, so this was how we communicated. I heard him snap the pen off my board. The sound was sharp and loud in the silence. Then I heard it drop on the floor. When he bent down to pick it up, I saw the shadow of his fingers under the door. just the tips, moving slowly. That image still makes my stomach turn. I was terrified beyond words. For a second, I thought about calling my two guy friends who lived 4 floors above me. They were strong, protective, the kind of people you think of when you need help. But then another thought hit me. What if he hurt them too? That fear stopped me. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just sat there, completely frozen. After what felt like forever, he snapped the pen back onto the board and moved on. I didn't breathe again until his footsteps faded. He stopped at one more door. The door of the girl he was actually there for. We would find out later that he had targeted her specifically, and in a cruel twist of fate, she and her roommate were the only ones on the hall who had left their door unlocked. The hallway was so quiet during all of this that it felt unreal. No one made a sound. Every girl on that floor was probably holding her breath, listening, praying. I was still frozen on my bed when I heard it happen. Suddenly, screaming broke the silence. Raw, terrified, angry screams. "Get the fuck out of my room, you freak! What the fuck is wrong with you?" Everything exploded after that. I finally moved, stumbling to the phone and hitting redial with shaking hands. But it turned out I wasn't the only one. Other girls had already called the dorm counselor. He was already on his way with a campus police officer right behind him. The guy came flying out of the girl's room. She wasn't hurt, thank God. He slammed through the stairwell door he had entered from, just as the dorm counselor and the campus cop ran off the elevator onto our floor. In seconds, every single door opened. We all poured into the hallway at once, talking over each other, crying, shouting, trying to explain what we had seen, who he stopped at, what he did, how close he came. They caught him that night. The part that still unsettles me the most is who he turned out to be. He wasn't some stranger lurking in the shadows. He was a guy from my math class, someone I had seen regularly, someone who blended in well enough that no one suspected. Him. We never really learned what his issues were. Before that night, his attacks had been outside and they had been clear muggings. But that night was different. That night, he entered a dorm. He targeted a specific girl. Whatever line he hadn't crossed before, he was crossing it then. I don't believe he had mugging on his mind anymore. What stays with me isn't just the fear of that night, but the realization that danger doesn't always look like danger. Sometimes it sits a few rows away from you in class. Sometimes it breathes quietly on the other side of a locked door. And sometimes the only thing standing between safety and disaster is a small habit, like remembering to lock your door. Nick dropped out of high school in 9th grade and never really found his way back to anything stable after that. He drifted from place to place, never holding on to one job or one town for very long. By the time all of this happened, people already thought of him as someone who lived on the edges of society, moving wherever he could survive, doing whatever work or favors kept him going. He didn't have much to lose, and that made him dangerous in a quiet, unpredictable way. Alina was very different, at least on the surface. She had gone to high school with my husband and had been one of his closest friends back then. They stayed in touch even after graduation, and in 2003, when my husband and I were in college, she came to visit us. She didn't seem threatening or unstable. She laughed easily, talked about old memories, and blended in like anyone else. There was nothing about her that made you think she could be connected to something violent. That's what makes everything that came later so hard to understand. Jack was also a close friend of my husband. He was the kind of person who got pulled into bad situations without fully thinking through the consequences. At the time, he had gotten involved in dealing weed for Native Americans in northern New York. It wasn't a small side thing. It was serious enough that when he got pulled over after making a pickup, the police searched his car, found the weed, and arrested him on the spot. He ended up spending 6 months in jail. Those 6 months changed everything. When Jack got out, he wasn't free in the way most people think of freedom. He owed money, a lot of money, the kind of money you don't just walk away from. The Native Americans he had been dealing for expected to be paid, and Jack didn't have the means to do that. He was scared, stressed, and probably desperate. He talked to people he trusted, trying to figure out what to do next. Somewhere along the way, Nick and Alina decided they saw an opportunity. Instead of helping Jack get out of trouble, they believed they could use him. They convinced themselves that if they delivered Jack to the reservation, they could step into his place and become the new dealers. They thought this would solve their problems and maybe even make them money. It was a plan built on greed, fear, and a complete lack of concern for Jack as a human being. They invited Jack to Alina's house under the pretense of hanging out. There was no sign of danger, no warning. Jack trusted them. He had no reason not to. When he arrived, Alina hid behind bushes near the house. As Jack walked by, unaware of what was about to happen, she came out of nowhere and hit him on the head with a rock. It was sudden and brutal. He dropped to the ground unconscious. While he was out, they tied him up. They didn't hesitate. They didn't stop to think. They put him into the trunk of his own car, closed it, and drove off. By the time Jack woke up, they were already deep into the drive toward New York. He was trapped, confused, and terrified, banging on the inside of the trunk, trying to make himself heard. Eventually, they pulled over at a rest stop. Jack begged them to let him out so he could use the bathroom. He promised he wouldn't run. He said he just needed to take a piss. He was probably saying anything he could think of to buy time or create a chance to escape. They believed him, or maybe they just didn't care enough to think it through. The moment they let him out, Jack ran. They chased him. Panic took over. The situation spiraled fast. Nick pulled out a gun and shot Jack in the back. There was no warning, no hesitation. Jack went down and was left in a creek in Stafford, New York. They didn't check if he was alive. They didn't call for help. They left him there like he was nothing. After that, they focused on covering their tracks. They took his wallet, the rope they had used to tie him up, and his clothes. They dumped these items in a dumpster in Rochester, New York. Then they drove Jack's car all the way to Chicopee, Massachusetts. Once there, they set it on fire, destroying what evidence they could and trying to make it look like the car had simply vanished or been stolen. One of the most disturbing parts of the entire story is Alina's role in all of this. It was widely believed that she was involved in the entire murder from start to finish. Many people thought she was in the car with Nick, fully participating in everything that happened. But when it came time for Nick to talk, he told a slightly different version. He admitted that Alina hit Jack with the rock and helped put him into the trunk. After that, according to Nick, he called Alina later to help him set the car on fire. He claimed she wasn't there for the shooting itself. Even after the trial, Alina seemed to vanish. She disappeared from everyone's lives. People stopped hearing about her. There were no updates, no clear picture of where she ended up or how she lived afterward. It was like she faded into the background, carrying whatever guilt or secrets she had with her. What makes this story even stranger is what happened shortly before the murder. Native Americans had come down to the Chester area looking for Jack. They went door to door asking questions. At one point, they even asked my sister-in-law and her husband at the time if they knew where Jack was. Her husband back then was known to be shady and involved in drugs himself, which made the situation even more unsettling. It was clear that Jack was being looked for, that his debt wasn't forgotten, and that things were closing in around him. According to official court records, the murder didn't happen exactly the way people first described it. The version my husband heard initially was passed around by word of mouth. Long before the court proceedings began, stories changed slightly depending on who was telling them. Some details were exaggerated, others left out. Fear and rumor filled in the gaps. Only later did the official version emerge, shaped by evidence, testimonies, and legal strategy. Still, no matter which version you look at, the core of the story remains the same. Jack trusted the wrong people. Nick saw a chance to escape his own problems by sacrificing someone else. Alina crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. What started as a plan built on greed and desperation ended in murder, and a life was erased because people believed they could control something that was never theirs to control. What stays with me isn't just the violence of what happened, but how ordinary everyone involved seemed before it all came out. These were people who visited us, who sat in the same rooms, who laughed and shared memories. None of it looked like a warning sign. And that's the part that lingers, the understanding that sometimes the most terrifying stories don't begin with monsters, they begin with friends. When I was a kid, my bedroom was in a strange spot in our house. Right next to it was a small shed that was attached to the building, and there was a set of glass doors inside my room that led directly into that shed. At the time, it didn't seem like a big deal. It was just part of the house, something I had grown up with, something normal. We lived on a very rural road, far away from town. We did have neighbors, but they were spread out, not close enough that you could easily see their houses from ours. At night, it felt especially isolated, like our house existed on its own little island surrounded by darkness. Around the time I was 12 or 13 years old, sometime in 2002 or 2003, things started to change. It began quietly, in ways that were easy to question and explain away if you wanted to. Late at night, I started hearing footsteps in the shed outside my bedroom. At first, I told myself it was just the house settling or maybe an animal, but then I started seeing something too. Through the glass doors, I could make out a figure moving around, someone walking back and forth right outside my room. Sometimes I would hear the sound of the door handle being tested, like someone was trying to pull the door open. I was terrified. Every time it happened, my heart would race so hard, it felt like it might burst out of my chest. I would jump out of bed and run to my parents' room, shaking, trying to explain what I had heard and seen. They would get up, annoyed and tired, and check the shed. Every single time, there was nothing there. No signs of anyone, no broken locks, no open doors. Eventually, my dad got fed up. He was convinced I was imagining things, letting my fear get the better of me. One night, after being woken up yet again, he slapped me across the face and told me I was being dramatic. That moment stuck with me in a way I didn't understand back then. I felt embarrassed, ashamed, and completely alone. After that, I stopped waking them up. I still heard the footsteps. I still saw the shadowy figure moving outside my door. It didn't stop. It happened 3 or 4 nights a week, sometimes more. But I dealt with it on my own. I pushed my bed in front of the glass doors so they couldn't be opened easily. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it made me feel like I had at least some control. I found a piece of scrap rebar and kept it next to my bed just in case. I didn't even really know what I would do with it, but having it there made me feel a little less helpless. Night after night, I lay awake listening, barely sleeping. Over time, something worse than fear crept in, doubt. I started wondering if I really was imagining it, if maybe I was crazy. When something happens for months and no one else believes you, you start to question your own mind. About 6 months after it all started, something happened that changed everything. One day, my dad picked me up from school early. That alone was strange. He didn't explain much, just said we needed to go home and talk to the police. My stomach dropped. My first thought, exhausted and confused from months of poor sleep, was that I was in trouble. I honestly thought I was being arrested for causing drama or lying. When we pulled up to the house and I saw multiple police cars parked outside, I completely panicked. My mom saw how scared I was and pulled me aside to calm me down. That's when she explained what was really going on. Earlier that day, my dad had gone into the shed to get some tools and realized that a lot of them were missing. Chainsaws, electric drills, expensive equipment, all gone. He called the police, but at first he didn't connect it to anything else. He mentioned it to the neighbors as a warning, just in case someone was going around stealing things. That's when one of our neighbors told him something disturbing. He admitted that his son might have stolen the tools to sell them for drug money. He asked my dad not to involve the police and said they would pay him back. My dad refused. He didn't want money, he wanted answers. He told the police anyway. The police went to the neighbor's house and searched the son's room. What they found there changed my life forever. Along with the stolen tools and drugs, they found photos. Photos of me. Photos taken on our property. School photos of me that had been stolen. And photos of me inside my bedroom. It was him, the neighbor's son. He had been sneaking into the shed all along. He had tried multiple times to open the door to my room. Every time I turned on the light or shined a torch toward the glass, he ran away. That was why my parents never caught him. That was why there was never anyone there when they checked. The police believed he started stealing tools because he was already there so often. Stealing wasn't the original reason he was coming into the shed. It was something he added later. When I understood what had really been happening, I felt sick. I couldn't stop thinking about all the nights I had been lying awake, listening, wondering if I was crazy, wondering if I deserved to be slapped for being scared. My parents were furious, not just at him, but at themselves. They apologized over and over for not believing me. Even now, years later, they still feel terrible about it. I try not to think too much about what could have happened if things had gone differently. If I hadn't been such a light sleeper, if I hadn't moved my bed, if I hadn't turned on the light when I heard him. Those thoughts are too heavy. I never went to court. The police recorded a video of me recounting everything, and that was enough. I didn't want to see him again. I still don't know exactly what happened to him, and honestly, I don't want to know. I just hope he got help before he did something that couldn't be undone. Looking back now as an adult, I understand my parents a little better. There was no evidence at first. Nothing broken, nothing stolen. If I heard a child telling that story today, I might struggle to believe it too. Fear can look like imagination when you don't have proof. I don't blame them anymore, though I still tease them about it sometimes. There was one small, unexpected good thing that came out of all of this. After everything was over, my parents finally gave in and let me get some pet mice. They thought it might help me feel safe again, give me something positive to focus on. One of them was named Paprika, or Pappy for short. I had him for 6 years. He was gentle and curious and comforting in a way I didn't know I needed. Taking care of him helped me heal in ways I can't fully explain. He was the reason I realized I wanted to work with animals one day. Even now, years later, that memory still feels close. Not loud or dramatic, but quiet and heavy. A reminder of how easily fear can be dismissed. How dangerous it is when a child isn't believed, and how sometimes the scariest things aren't imagined at all. I was 15 years old when this happened, and even now, years later, I can still remember it with a level of clarity that surprises me. Some memories fade with time, but others stay sharp, like they get stuck somewhere deep in your body instead of your mind. This is one of those memories. It didn't feel dramatic when I lived it. There was no music, no slow motion, nothing cinematic about it. It was just a normal day that quietly turned into one of the scariest moments of my life. At that age, my world was pretty small. School, friends, and dance practice took up most of my time. One of my close friends was getting ready for her quinceañera, and a group of us were practicing at her house almost every day. Her family lived in a neighborhood where most people spoke Spanish, and most of the kids I danced with were Hispanic. I was the only white kid in the group, which never really bothered me. It was just a fact. We laughed, practiced, complained about sore feet, and counted down the days until the big event. Nothing about it felt strange or unsafe. Because none of us could drive yet, we usually went home by taxi. This was a small town, and it wasn't unusual for taxis to be unmarked. A lot of people ran small transportation businesses, especially within the Hispanic community. You didn't always see a company logo or a number on the side of the car. It was just how things worked there, and no one questioned it. We'd done this dozens of times without any issues. That day, it was just me and two other girls who needed a ride home. I didn't speak much Spanish, only a few basic words, so my friends usually handled talking to the drivers. We got into an older minivan that had clearly seen better days. It was dented, worn down, and smelled faintly like old upholstery, and something I couldn't quite place. At the time, I didn't think much of it. It was just another ride. My friends told the driver that he should take me home first. The reason was simple. I could describe where I lived more easily in English, and they could explain their addresses better in Spanish once I was dropped off. The driver agreed, but then he asked them where they lived. They told him. That part didn't seem strange either. Looking back, I realized that was the moment things started to shift, but at the time, it felt normal. Instead of driving toward my neighborhood, he went straight to theirs. I remember feeling slightly confused, but not alarmed. Maybe he just wanted to get their directions first, I thought. The van pulled up in front of their house, and they got out like nothing was wrong. I waved goodbye, expecting the van to turn around and head toward my place next. As soon as the doors closed and the van started moving again, I became very aware that it was just me and him. The silence felt heavier than it had before. The sound of the engine and the tires on the road suddenly seemed much louder. I noticed things I hadn't paid attention to earlier. His age, his size, the way the dashboard was cracked, the way the seats sagged. From past experiences and maybe just from being a teenage girl who grew up hearing warnings, my body went on high alert before my mind fully caught up. I didn't panic, but I felt tense, like something inside me had tightened. He started talking to me, telling me that he took this job to pay for a vacation for his family. The way he said it felt casual, almost like he was trying to reassure me. I remember feeling my guard drop just a little. Family man, I thought. That must mean he's safe. It's strange how easily we try to talk ourselves out of fear, especially when we're young and don't want to seem rude or paranoid. We got closer to my neighborhood and I started to relax again. When we reached my street, I told him to turn right. I even pointed just to be clear. He didn't slow down. He didn't turn. The van kept going straight. In that exact moment, it felt like my stomach dropped out of my body. My heart started racing and my hands moved on their own, reaching for the door handle. Everything inside me was screaming that something was wrong. He looked at me and said that I was very beautiful. Then he suggested that I should let him take me out to eat. The words felt heavy in the air, like they didn't belong there. I remember how exposed I felt sitting in that seat, how small the space suddenly seemed. I told him no, that I wanted to go home. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He laughed it off and asked if I was hungry. He kept pushing, saying we could get something to eat. I said no again and asked to go home. I tried to keep my tone polite but firm, the way girls are taught to be. Don't provoke. Don't be rude. Just get out safely. Instead of turning around, he pulled into the back of an empty parking lot. The place was quiet and mostly dark, with no other cars around. The moment the van stopped, my whole body went numb. It was like my brain couldn't decide what to do, so it froze. I could hear my breathing, shallow and fast, and I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. He leaned over and started to put his arm around the back of my seat. That's when something finally snapped inside me. I don't know where the courage came from, because I didn't feel brave at all. I just looked straight at him, right in the face, and said, "Take me home. Now." I didn't yell, but my voice was hard in a way it hadn't been before. For a moment, he just looked at me. Then he pulled out of the parking lot and started driving. The relief I felt was immediate but fragile, like it could disappear at any second. I stayed tense the whole way, watching the road, watching him, ready to speak up again if I needed to. As we got closer to my area, he asked if he could have my number. I didn't answer. I stared out the window and pretended I didn't hear him. When he got near my street, I didn't tell him exactly where to stop. I asked him to drop me off several roads away. I didn't want him to know where I actually lived. When I got out of the van, I didn't go straight home. I walked toward an elderly couple's house nearby and acted like that was where I lived. I waited until the van drove away. Then I ran. I cut through the woods, branches scraping my arms, my lungs burning as I sprinted all the way home. Once inside, I locked the door and immediately called my friends, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Their parents took it seriously right away. They called the taxi company and reported what had happened. The man was fired almost immediately. Knowing that helped, but it didn't erase the fear. For months afterward, I was constantly on edge. Every unfamiliar car made my stomach tighten. I worried that he might look for me, that he might be angry and want revenge. Even though nothing else happened, the feeling stayed with me. What scared me the most wasn't just what he did. It was how quickly an ordinary situation turned into something dangerous. One moment, I was just a kid going home from dance practice. The next, I was trapped in a van, realizing how vulnerable I really was. It taught me a harsh lesson at a young age, one that a lot of people, especially girls, learn far too early. I still think about that version of myself sometimes. 15 years old, trying to be polite, trying not to overreact, trusting that adults would do the right thing. I wish I could go back and tell her that her fear was valid, that she wasn't wrong for feeling it, and that speaking up probably saved her from something much worse. Even now, telling this story feels important, not because it's dramatic, but because it's real. It's the kind of thing that happens quietly in everyday places to people who never expect it. I grew up in a pretty ordinary hometown, the kind of place where most people know each other, or at least recognize familiar faces. It wasn't a big city. It was one of those towns where news traveled fast, where stories stuck around for years, and where you felt like nothing truly shocking could happen without everyone knowing about it almost immediately. At least, that's what I believed back then. There was a kid I went to high school with who was 1 grade younger than me. I didn't know him well. We weren't friends, and we didn't hang out in the same circles, but I knew who he was. Everyone did. You couldn't really avoid knowing him, partly because he lived on the same street as my aunt and uncle, and partly because a few years earlier, he'd been in the local news for something that made people talk about him like he was a hero. When he was younger, he had saved his father from drowning while his dad was having a heart attack. From what everyone said, it was a terrifying situation. His father collapsed in the water, and somehow this kid had the presence of mind to pull him out and keep him alive until help arrived. Firefighters and police honored him afterward. There was a banquet. He got awards. His picture was in the paper. Adults talked about him with admiration, like he was proof that good kids still existed, that bravery and selflessness weren't dead. That story followed him for years. Teachers mentioned it. Parents used him as an example. He was known as the kid who saved his dad's life. No one ever talked about him in a negative way. If anything, people seemed proud that someone like that came from our town. So when everything else happened later, it felt unreal, like it belonged to a different place, a different story, not ours. The first time I heard about the murders, I didn't even connect them to him. An older couple had been found dead a few blocks away from my aunt and uncle's house. They were well known in the area. The man had been a former judge or district attorney, someone with a long career in the legal system. Because of that, the initial assumption was that it had something to do with his past work. People thought maybe someone he had sent to prison had gotten out and come back for revenge. That explanation made sense to people. It fit the narrative everyone was comfortable with. The details were disturbing even before the truth came out. The couple had gone out to a family dinner that evening. While they were gone, someone broke into their home. Instead of stealing things and leaving, the person stayed. He hid in their closet and waited. That part alone makes my skin crawl, even now. The idea of someone standing in the dark, listening to a house settle, waiting for people to come home, is horrifying in a very quiet way. When the couple returned, they went to bed, completely unaware that someone else was in their house. Sometime during the night, they were stabbed to death in their sleep. There was no dramatic confrontation, no chance to defend themselves. It was fast and brutal and deeply personal, in a way that didn't make sense if it was just about robbery or random violence. For a while, the town stayed stuck on the idea that it was revenge. People whispered about former inmates, about grudges, about unfinished business from the past. It was easier to believe that than to accept that something else was going on. About a week or so after the murder, something happened that has never left my mind. I was skipping class that day. I don't even remember why. I think I just wanted to leave school early. As I was walking down the hallway, I turned a corner near the lockers and suddenly stopped. He was there, the kid from my hometown, the hero kid. He was standing in front of a row of lockers, punching them over and over. His hands were red, and he didn't seem to care. He was crying, not quietly, but in this raw, uncontrollable way. He was pulling at his hair, pacing, hitting the metal doors like he was trying to break through something that wasn't there. I froze. I didn't know what I was seeing. At first, it just looked like a breakdown, like someone who couldn't handle stress or grief. But then he looked up and saw me. I've seen scared eyes before. I've seen angry eyes. I've seen sad eyes. What I saw that day didn't fit any of those categories. His eyes were empty in a way I didn't know was possible. There was no panic in them, no embarrassment at being seen like that, just this flat, dead look like he wasn't fully there anymore. We locked eyes for maybe a second or two. It felt much longer. I didn't say anything. He didn't say anything either. Something deep in me told me not to engage, not to ask if he was okay, not to try to be kind or curious. I just turned around and walked the other way as calmly as I could. I got to my car and left. At the time, I didn't connect that moment to the murders. It felt disturbing, yes, but teenagers have breakdowns. People cry in hallways. I pushed it out of my mind. Then the truth came out. He was eventually caught, not because of some long police investigation or forensic breakthrough, but because he told his girlfriend what he had done. I don't know why he told her. Guilt, maybe, or arrogance, or a need to be seen. Whatever the reason, she went to the police and everything unraveled from there. When people learned that it was him, the same kid who had been honored by firefighters and police years earlier, the town went quiet in a way I can only describe as stunned. It felt like the air was heavier, like everyone was questioning their own judgment, their own assumptions about the people around them. The details that came out afterward made it even worse. Before the murders, he had been going around the neighborhood at night, checking for unlocked doors, just walking up to houses and testing handles, seeing who was careless, seeing who was vulnerable. When that information became public, my aunt immediately thought about her house. She had security cameras installed all around her property. She lived on the same street as him, and at the time of the murder, she had been home alone with my two little cousins, who were only 2 and 5 years old. She went back through her camera footage. That night, you can see a hooded figure walk up to her front door. He jiggles the handle. It's locked. He doesn't leave right away. Instead, he walks around the side of the house and checks the gate. That's locked too. He stands there for a full minute, just motionless, like he's thinking. Then he walks away. My aunt was inside the house the entire time, alone with 2 small children, completely unaware that someone was outside, deciding whether or not to try to get in. When she told us that, my stomach dropped. It's one thing to hear about something terrible happening somewhere else. It's another thing to realize how close it came to your own family, how thin the line really was between safety and tragedy. Looking back, the part that haunts me the most isn't just what he did, but who he was supposed to be. He wasn't some outsider. He wasn't someone people warned their kids about. He was a local kid, a hero, someone who had once been praised by the same systems that later had to hunt him down. I think about that moment in the school hallway a lot, about his eyes, about how something inside him already seemed gone. I wonder if anyone else saw it too, or if I was just unlucky enough to cross his path at the wrong moment. It changed the way I see people. It changed the way I think about safety, about appearances, about the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of the world. I learned that day that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like the kid from down the street. Sometimes they look like heroes. Sometimes they walk right past you in a school hallway and you don't realize how close you are to something truly horrifying until much later. Even now, years later, that story still feels like something out of a nightmare. Not because it was loud or chaotic, but because it was quiet, ordinary, and close. Too close. I still think about this sometimes, even though it happened years ago, and no matter how many times I replay it in my head, I can't find a clean explanation that makes everything line up. It wasn't dramatic in the moment. There were no flashing lights or loud sounds or anything that screamed that something strange was happening. That's actually what makes it harder to shake. It felt normal while it was happening, and only afterward did it slowly turn unsettling. At the time, I was in college taking a physics class that happened to be scheduled as the very last class of the day. Anyone who's been through college knows how that feels. By the time late afternoon rolls around, your brain is already checked out. You're watching the clock more than you're listening to the lecture. That day was especially hard to sit through because the weather was perfect. It was one of those late summer afternoons where the sky is clear. The air is warm but not heavy, and everything outside feels more inviting than a classroom. I remember sitting there, half paying attention, half daydreaming about getting out of that room. I kept glancing back and forth between my wristwatch and the clock on the classroom wall. Every few minutes I'd look again, hoping time had magically jumped forward. It hadn't. Physics dragged on the way it always did when you wanted to be somewhere else. Eventually, though, the class finally ended. I packed up my things, walked out of the building, and headed toward the parking lot with that familiar feeling of relief. The drive home from campus was about 20 miles. It wasn't a straight highway trip either. It involved a mix of main roads and quiet country roads. I didn't mind the drive. In fact, I usually enjoyed it. I was really into CB radios and electronics back then. It was more than a casual interest. I understood how the equipment worked, where signals were strongest, and where reception usually dropped. Along my route home, I knew exactly which high points gave the best chance of reaching someone on the radio. I had a routine. As I drove, I'd use the CB radio to call home and let my family know I was on my way. My mom, especially, loved that. She always seemed to time things perfectly. When I got home, supper would already be waiting, still warm. It was one of those small comforts that made a long day feel lighter. That was what I was thinking about as I started the drive. Not time, not anything strange. Just getting home, calling in, and eating. As I left the campus area and moved onto the quieter roads, something caught my attention. Ahead of me, the road dipped slightly and then rose again, and along that stretch, I noticed a strange fog. It had a greenish tint to it, not thick enough to completely block visibility, but noticeable enough to stand out. What made it odd was the timing. This was a warm, late summer afternoon. It wasn't early morning, it wasn't night. Fog like that didn't really make sense. I remember slowing down slightly as I drove through it, more out of curiosity than fear. It covered only a small section of the road, almost like a low cloud had settled there for no clear reason. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I didn't even think too deeply about it at the time. My mind was still on getting home and calling my family. The fog passed behind me and I continued on. A little further down the road, I reached the first high point where I usually got good CB reception. I picked up the mic and called home, using the same call I always used. There was no response. That didn't bother me. CB radio can be hit or miss. Sometimes signals don't carry, or someone's busy, or there's interference. I kept driving. A few minutes later, I reached the second high spot. This one almost always worked. I called again. Still nothing. That made me pause, but I didn't panic. I told myself it was just one of those days where the signal wasn't cooperating. I tried again at the third known high point. Once more, there was no answer. That's when a small knot of concern formed in my stomach. My family never missed a contact. If I called, someone always answered, even if it was just to say they'd call me back. It was part of our routine, just like supper waiting on the table. The silence felt wrong, but I still didn't jump to any extreme conclusions. I figured maybe they were busy, or maybe the radio was acting up. As I continued driving, I reached the hill that overlooked my town. From that spot, you could see most of the area, and radio reception was excellent. There was no doubt that I should be able to reach them from there. I picked up the mic and called again, this time continuing to call as I drove down the hill, through the streets, all the way toward my neighborhood. Nothing. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the concern had shifted into something closer to fear. The first thing I noticed was the front door. It was wide open, not cracked, not unlocked, wide open. I could see straight through the house to the back door, which was also open. My heart started pounding. I jumped out of the car and ran inside, calling out for my mom, for anyone. My voice echoed through the house. There was no answer. Every room I glanced into was empty. No one was there. The house felt wrong, like it shouldn't be that quiet. I ran straight through to the back door and out into the yard. That's when I saw my mother. She was outside, calmly hanging laundry like it was any normal day. The relief hit me so hard that my knees almost felt weak. I called out to her, probably sounding more shaken than I realized. She looked over at me, completely calm, and said something that immediately confused me. She said, "You're home early." I told her that wasn't possible. I held up my watch and showed her the time. According to my watch, I was right on schedule, not early, not late, just normal. She frowned and said, "That couldn't be right." According to her, it wasn't that late yet. Supper wasn't even close to being ready. We went back inside together, and that's when things really stopped making sense. Every clock in the house was behind my watch. Not by a few minutes, by nearly 2 hours. The kitchen clock, the living room clock, everything. All of them matched each other, and all of them disagreed with my watch. At first, my mom suggested there might have been a power outage that reset the clocks. That seemed reasonable, but then we checked the radio. The time being broadcast matched the house clocks, not my watch. That's when I felt a chill run through me. My watch had been correct earlier. I knew that for a fact. It had matched the clocks at school less than an hour before I left campus. I hadn't adjusted it. I hadn't bumped it. It wasn't malfunctioning. And yet, somehow, according to every other reference point, I had arrived home more than an hour earlier than I should have. I sat down at the kitchen table, trying to process it. My head felt heavy, like it does when you're overtired or overstimulated. I kept running through possibilities. Had I left class early? No. I distinctly remembered the end of the lecture. Had I misread the clock? Unlikely. Had I driven faster than usual? Even if I had, there was no way I could have made up that much time on that route. The thought that stuck with me the most was a strange one. I wondered what would have happened if I had arrived home at my regular time. Would I have seen myself pulling into the driveway? Would the house have been empty again? Would something else have been different? The thought made me uncomfortable enough that I stopped thinking about it. To this day, I don't have an explanation that satisfies me. I've gone over every logical possibility I can think of. Faulty memory, faulty watch, misjudged time, none of it fully fits. Everything lines up just enough to be unsettling, but not enough to prove anything concrete. What stays with me isn't fear in the traditional sense. It's more like a quiet unease, a reminder that sometimes reality doesn't behave the way we expect it to. One normal day, one ordinary drive home, and suddenly, time itself felt unreliable. Nothing bad happened. No one was hurt. Life went on exactly as it always had. And maybe that's what makes it harder to understand. It was just a normal day that didn't quite add up, and I'm still not sure it ever will. Sorry to interrupt. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Shadow Archives for daily true horror content that will haunt your dreams and keep you wondering what lurks in the shadows. And don't forget to tap the notification bell so you never miss a new story when the darkness calls out to you. A couple of years ago, maybe 2 or 3 now, something started happening in my house that I couldn't explain. At first, it was subtle enough that I almost convinced myself it wasn't real. Just little things, sounds that didn't quite fit, moments where I'd pause and think, did I really hear that? Or am I just tired? I lived alone, had a dog, and my place was usually quiet at night. The kind of quiet you get used to. That's probably why the first sound stood out so much. It started with singing. Not loud singing, not music blasting, just this low, distant voice, like someone humming or softly singing to themselves. It usually happened late at night, when everything else was still. At first, I assumed it was something electronic. I checked my Xbox headset, thinking maybe I'd left it connected and it was picking up some random signal. I turned off my record player. I checked my phone to see if some app was playing audio in the background. I even turned my radio on and off, a few times just to rule it out. Every time the sound would stop for a bit, then come back, and I could never pin it down. What made it worse was that it didn't sound like it was coming from one clear direction. Sometimes it felt like it was beneath me. Other times it felt like it was inside the walls. Along with the singing, there was this dull thumping sound, almost like someone shifting their weight or knocking something against wood. It wasn't rhythmic enough to be plumbing, and it didn't sound like an animal either. Still, I tried to be rational. Old houses make noise. Wood expands and contracts. Your brain fills in the blanks when you're tired. So I ignored it. Weeks went by, then months. The sounds would come and go. Some nights were quiet. Other nights I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening, trying to convince myself that I wasn't slowly losing my mind. I didn't tell many people about it because I knew how it sounded. Hearing singing that no one else could hear? That's not exactly a conversation starter. Then one night, everything changed. I was in my bedroom when my dog suddenly came running in. She wasn't just curious or alert, she was furious. Her hair was standing up and she was barking and snarling at the floor like it had personally offended her. She started digging at the carpet, claws tearing at it, trying to get at whatever was underneath. I had never seen her act like that before, not in the house, not ever. That's when the fear finally hit me, for real. Animals don't imagine things the way people do. If she was reacting like that, something was wrong. I got her out of the room as quickly as I could, shut the door, and grabbed my gun. My hands were shaking, but my head felt strangely clear. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but I knew I wasn't sleeping that night. I stayed awake until morning, sitting there with my rifle, barely moving. My dog stayed close to me the entire time, pressed against my leg. I must have dozed off at some point, because I remember waking up with my hand still gripping the gun, my arms stiff and sore. The sun was coming up and everything looked normal again, which almost made it worse. As soon as it was fully light outside, I went out to check around the house. I walked the perimeter slowly, looking for anything out of place. That's when I noticed it. Behind a thick bush near the side of the house, partially hidden, was a small door. One I had never seen before. It took me a moment to process what I was looking at. It was a crawl-space door. I stood there staring at it, trying to remember if I'd ever noticed it before. I honestly couldn't recall seeing it even once. The bush had grown thick over time, completely covering it. I went back inside, grabbed some tools, and started cutting the bush away, right then and there. I didn't care how early it was or how ridiculous I probably looked. I needed to know what was behind that door. By noon, the door was fully exposed. It was old, worn, and unlocked. That alone sent a chill through me. I opened it slowly, my heart pounding, expecting anything and everything. Inside, the crawlspace was not empty. The first thing I saw was a pallet laid out on the dirt floor, covered with blankets. Someone had clearly been sleeping there. There was a teddy bear sitting off to the side, which was unsettling in a way I can't fully explain. Next to it was a trash bag filled with clothes. I recognized some of the items almost immediately. They were mine. Things I had thrown out months earlier. Old shoes, worn shirts, stuff I knew I had gotten rid of. There were also Legos scattered around, which made no sense to me at the time. Then I looked to my right. There was a camera. Not an old broken camera, not something half buried. A working camera positioned deliberately, aiming upward, aiming into my house. My stomach dropped. I grabbed the camera and went back inside. I had an old laptop that I didn't use anymore, so I hooked the camera up to that. Part of me wanted to smash it immediately and pretend I never saw it, but another part of me needed to know. I needed to see what had been recorded. There were several videos. Every single one showed the same thing at the start. A man walking through the woods near my house. He'd move carefully, like he didn't want to be seen, then crouch down near the crawlspace door and slip inside. Once he was in there, the singing would start. It was the same singing I'd been hearing at night. Then the videos got worse. You could hear me inside my house, going about my normal routines, walking around, turning on the shower, opening cabinets, and this man would narrate it, calmly, casually, like it was entertainment. "Ooh, Inevitable Pizzas is about to get a shower," he said in one video, almost amused. I felt sick. One video was from a night I had brought a girl home. Hearing it from his perspective was beyond disturbing. He made comments about hoping to hear us have sex. Just said it out loud, like he was watching a show meant for him. I don't think I've ever felt that violated in my life. I didn't keep the videos. I didn't call anyone. I didn't think. I took the camera, destroyed it, wiped the files, and threw everything out. Then I went straight to the hardware store, I bought new locks, heavy ones, and installed them on the crawlspace door myself. I made sure there was no way someone could open it from the outside. I thought that was the end of it. That night, I heard the singing again. It started the same way it always had, faint at first, then clearer. Then I heard something else. Tugging, the sound of someone pulling on the crawlspace door, metal scraping, and then a voice, angry this time. "Son of a bitch!" My dog went absolutely insane, barking, growling, throwing herself at the door. I went to the window and carefully pulled the blinds aside just enough to see outside. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. There was a man outside my house messing with the crawlspace lock. I grabbed my gun and went outside. I didn't shout. I didn't warn him. I just stepped onto the porch and turned on the porch light. He screamed. Not a tough guy shout, not anger, pure fear. He bolted immediately, running into the woods as fast as he could. I stood there for a long time, gun in hand, listening to the sounds of him crashing through the brush until everything went quiet again. I never saw him after that. I changed more locks after that night. I checked every part of my house. I became hyper-aware of sounds, of movement, of anything out of place. Over time, the fear faded enough for me to live normally again, but it never completely went away. What messes with me the most isn't just that someone was living under my floor. It's how long it went on without me knowing. How he watched my routines. How close he was every single night. How normal everything seemed on the surface. Sometimes when my house is quiet late at night, I still catch myself listening, just in case. I still replay that night in my head more than I'd like to admit. It wasn't dramatic in the way movies make things dramatic. There was no background music, no slow build-up, no clear warning that something bad was about to happen. It started like any other late-night drive, the kind you've done so many times that you don't even think about it anymore. And that's exactly why it still bothers me. It felt normal right up until it didn't. I had just finished a workout at the gym. It was late, around 3 in the morning, and I was tired in that heavy post-gym way where your body feels worn out, but your mind is oddly calm. The gym I went to was about 40 minutes from my house, and I always took the same route home. It was mostly back roads, quieter than the main highway, with fewer cars and fewer stoplights. I liked it that way. It shaved a little time off the drive, and at that hour, it felt peaceful. One important thing about that route, though, was the lack of cell service. Large stretches of it were basically dead zones. I knew that, but I never really thought much about it. I'd driven those roads dozens of times, maybe more. Nothing had ever happened before, so my brain had filed the route under safe without question. That night was no different at first. The road was empty, my headlights cutting through the darkness, the radio playing quietly in the background. I was just focused on getting home, maybe grabbing something to eat and going to sleep. My mind was drifting between random thoughts. Nothing serious, nothing heavy. About halfway through the drive, I noticed something ahead on the side of the road. As I got closer, I could see it was a white Honda CR-V parked facing the road. That alone wasn't that strange, but it did catch my attention. The road wasn't a common place to stop, especially that late. Still, my first reaction wasn't fear. Ironically, I had been looking to buy a Honda CR-V around that time. I loved hiking, and it seemed like a practical vehicle to own. Reliable, roomy, good for outdoor trips. So when I saw it sitting there, part of my brain immediately went to that place. Maybe it's for sale, I thought. Maybe someone parked it there with a sign earlier, or maybe it broke down and the owner was nearby. Looking back, that was probably the moment where I should have just kept driving. Instead, I slowed down, passed it, then made a U-turn to go back and take a closer look. It didn't feel like a big decision at the time. There was no sense of danger yet, just mild curiosity. I pulled in closer, my headlights shining directly onto the vehicle. That's when everything changed. Out of nowhere, a man stepped out from behind the CRV. He hadn't been visible at all until that moment. He was older, maybe middle-aged, or a bit older than that, and for a split second, my brain tried to make the situation harmless. Maybe he's stranded, I thought. Maybe he needs help. Then I saw his face. The expression he had didn't match that explanation at all. There was no confusion, no relief at seeing another person. What I saw was anger, real, raw anger. His face looked tense, almost twisted, and his eyes locked onto me in a way that made my stomach drop instantly. Before I could fully process what was happening, he started sprinting toward my car. Not walking, not waving, sprinting. My body reacted before my thoughts did. My heart slammed into my chest, and my hands tightened on the steering wheel. As he ran, I saw him reach into his pocket like he was trying to pull something out. In my mind, there was no doubt about what it might be. A gun. That was the only thing that made sense. For a terrifying second, it looked like he was struggling to get it out. That struggle might be the only reason I'm able to tell this story now. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I threw the car into reverse and slammed the gas. The tires screeched as I backed up as fast as I could. I barely had time to think. I just reacted. I managed to back into a driveway a little ways down the road, spun the wheel, shifted gears, and took off. I don't remember checking my mirrors. I don't remember thinking about speed limits or turns or anything like that. I just drove. For a brief moment, I hoped that was the end of it, that he'd give up, or that I'd imagined the worst and he'd just stand there watching me disappear down the road. That hope didn't last long. In my rearview mirror, I saw headlights. He had jumped into his CRV and was coming after me. The realization hit hard. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't someone asking for help. This was a chase, and I was alone on dark back roads with no cell service. I pushed my car harder. I was driving a Honda Civic Si, which, thankfully, was much faster than his CRV. I could feel the engine responding as I accelerated, the road blurring slightly as my focus narrowed to nothing, but staying ahead of him. The chase lasted around 20 minutes, but it felt both shorter and longer than that. Shorter because adrenaline warps your sense of time. Longer because every second felt stretched, heavy with the awareness that one mistake could be it. One wrong turn, one missed curve, one hesitation. The roads twisted through stretches of darkness where there were no houses, no lights, nothing but trees and empty land. Every time I glanced in the mirror and saw his headlights still there, my chest tightened again. He didn't flash his lights. He didn't honk. He just followed. Eventually, I got closer to town. Streetlights started to appear, then intersections, then signs of other buildings. That was when I started to feel the slightest bit of hope. I knew where the police station was, and I headed straight for it. As I pulled into the area near the station, I saw his headlights fall back. He slowed down, then turned off onto another street. Just like that, he was gone. I pulled over, shaking so badly I could barely keep my hands steady. I sat there for a few minutes, just breathing, trying to get my heart rate under control. Once I felt like I could actually speak, I went inside and reported what happened. Even after everything was done, after I was home and safe, one image kept replaying in my mind. His face, the look he had when he sprinted toward my car. It didn't look human in the way we usually think of people looking human. His eyes were empty, almost soulless, and his skin looked pale and drawn tight, like something was off in a way I couldn't fully explain. A few days later, I was scrolling through the news when I saw an article that made my stomach drop. There had been an escaped convict in my area. The The report said he was considered highly aggressive and likely under the influence of drugs. They included a photo with the article. The moment I saw it, I knew it was him. Same face, same eyes, same expression that had burned itself into my memory that night on the road. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling that cold, sinking feeling all over again. The realization that I had been that close to someone like that, alone in the middle of nowhere, still sends chills through me. I don't take that route anymore. I don't stop on back roads late at night, and I definitely don't turn around to check out parked cars, no matter how harmless they might seem. That night taught me how fast things can turn, how thin the line is between an ordinary drive home and something much worse. Sometimes when I think about it, what scares me the most isn't even the chase itself. It's how easily I could have made a slightly different decision. How curiosity mixed with routine almost put me directly in harm's way, and how, for a brief moment, I was completely at the mercy of someone whose face I'll never forget. When I was 18, I was just starting my first week of college, and everything about that time in my life felt new, unfamiliar, and overwhelming. I didn't have a car back then, so my only option was to take the bus. My schedule had me enrolled in an early morning class, which meant waking up before sunrise and leaving the house while most of the world still fell asleep. The bus ride itself took almost an hour, and I remember how quiet and heavy those mornings felt, like the day hadn't fully decided to begin yet. The sky was still dark, not completely black, but that dull gray blue that comes just before the sun starts to rise. I didn't like walking alone at that hour, but I told myself I didn't have a choice. College was important, and missing class during the very first week felt unthinkable. That morning, I remember stepping outside and feeling the cold immediately. It wasn't freezing, but it was cold enough that I pulled my sweater tighter around me. The street I walked down wasn't usually busy at that hour. Most houses were dark, curtains closed, cars parked quietly along the curb. The only sounds were my footsteps and the distant noise of traffic far away. As I walked, I kept telling myself to stay alert but calm. I didn't want to scare myself for no reason. Still, I had this habit of scanning my surroundings, something I had learned over time just by being a young woman walking alone. A little ways ahead of me, I noticed someone walking toward me on the same side of the street. At first, it didn't seem unusual. People walk early in the morning for all kinds of reasons. But the longer I looked, the more uncomfortable I felt. There was no clear reason at first, just a feeling in my gut that something wasn't right. I remember thinking that I noticed him when he was still pretty far away, maybe 50 feet or so. That alone stood out to me. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about someone at that distance, but something about him made me focus. As he got closer, my unease grew stronger. I remember slowing my pace slightly, my mind racing with small thoughts. Should I cross the street? Should I turn around? Am I just overthinking this? I actually considered crossing to the other side, but then I felt embarrassed for even thinking that way. I told myself I was being dramatic. I didn't want to live my life constantly afraid or suspicious of every stranger, so I stayed where I was and kept walking. One thing that gave me a small sense of comfort was that I carried pepper spray. It wasn't something I thought about often, but that morning it felt important. I had it tucked into my pocket, and because I was wearing a long-sleeve sweater, I could slip my hand inside the sleeve and grip it without anyone noticing. I remember doing that almost automatically, not even fully realizing why at first. My body seemed to act before my mind caught up, as if some part of me already knew I might need it. The man was wearing a jacket, and the collar was pulled up high, almost covering his mouth. He also had on a knit hat pulled low on his head. Because of that, I couldn't see his face clearly, and that made me even more uneasy. As we got closer, I decided to step slightly to the side to give him space, the way people often do when passing each other on a sidewalk. It was a small, polite gesture, something I had done countless times before without a second thought. But the moment we were close enough to pass each other, everything changed. Without any warning, he reached out and grabbed my mouth, pressing his hand over it hard enough that I couldn't scream. At the same time, he tried to pull me toward him, away from the sidewalk. I remember how shocking it felt, how unreal it seemed. For a split second, my mind went blank. People always talk about screaming in situations like this, but the truth is, your body doesn't always respond the way you expect. I wanted to scream. I tried to scream, but my body felt frozen, like it needed a moment to understand what was happening. The pressure of his hand over my mouth was terrifying. I could feel my heart pounding so hard, it felt like it might burst out of my chest. Everything happened so fast, yet it also felt like time had slowed down. I could smell his jacket, feel the rough fabric against my face, and hear my own breathing turning panicked and shallow. In that moment, I honestly thought, this is how it happens. This is how people disappear. Somehow, I managed to react. My hand was already gripping the pepper spray inside my sleeve, and I pulled it out and sprayed it directly at his face. I didn't hesitate. I sprayed him once, but he still held on to me, still trying to keep my mouth covered. My fear turned into pure survival instinct. I sprayed him again, harder this time, aiming as best as I could. That second spray made a difference. He finally let go, recoiling and stumbling back. I sprayed him one last time, just to be sure, and then he turned and ran in the opposite direction. The moment he was gone, I didn't stop to think. I just ran. I ran as fast as I could, my legs shaking, my chest burning, tears pouring down my face. I clutched the pepper spray in my hand the entire time, terrified he might come back. My house was about 4 blocks away, and I ran the entire distance without stopping. As I ran, I passed 3 different people. I don't even remember what they looked like. I don't remember if they noticed me or if I said anything to them. I was crying so hard that I could barely see straight, but all I could think about was getting home, getting somewhere safe. When I finally reached my house, I rushed inside and locked the door behind me. My body was shaking uncontrollably. I slid down against the door and just sobbed. I don't know how long I sat there, trying to catch my breath, trying to calm myself down. Even though I was safe, my body didn't seem to believe it yet. My hands were still tight around the pepper spray, like letting go of it might make everything come crashing back. That day changed me in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. Even now, 10 years later, the memory still affects me. I can still picture that street, that early morning light, the feeling in my gut that I almost ignored. Sometimes it comes back in flashes, especially when I'm walking alone or when it's still dark outside. I find myself gripping my keys tighter, scanning my surroundings more carefully, replaying that moment over and over in my head. What makes it even more terrifying is what happened shortly after. Not long after my attack, there were reports about a girl in a nearby area who went missing. She had been walking to a pharmacy when she disappeared. At first, people hoped she had just run away or that there was some harmless explanation. But a month later, her body was found on the side of the freeway. Hearing that news hit me like a punch to the chest. I couldn't stop thinking about how close I might have been to that same fate. I kept wondering if it was the same person, if things would have ended differently for me, if I hadn't carried pepper spray, if I hadn't trusted that feeling in my gut enough to prepare myself. Those thoughts haunted me for a long time, and in some ways, they still do. Even now, years later, I think about how easily everything could have gone wrong. I think about how a normal morning, a simple walk to catch a bus, turned into one of the most terrifying moments of my life. I think about how many people, especially young women, walk alone every day, trusting that nothing will happen to them, hoping that the world will be kind. That experience taught me something I wish I didn't have to learn so young. It taught me that fear isn't always irrational, and intuition isn't something to ignore. It also taught me how fragile safety can be, how quickly it can be taken away, and how deeply an experience like that can stay with you, even a decade later. Back in the late 1990s, when I was in college, my life felt busy but simple in a way that only makes sense when you look back years later. I was juggling classes, papers, late nights, and friendships that felt like they would last forever. Two of my closest friends at the time were sisters who lived on the outskirts of town, far enough away that visiting them felt like a small trip, not just a quick walk down the street. They both worked at Pizza Hut, one as a cook and the older sister as a manager trainee. Their schedules were often late, especially on weekends, but they always found time for friends. Their house was the kind of place where you could show up unannounced, sit at the kitchen table, and talk for hours about nothing and everything at the same time. One Saturday night, the night before Easter, I was alone in my room working on a paper that was due the following Monday. This was before laptops and modern computers were common, so I was typing it out on a word processor, saving my work carefully and making sure I didn't lose anything. I remember feeling restless and tired of staring at the same lines over and over again. My brain felt fried, and no matter how much I reread what I had written, it all started to blur together. I told myself I needed a break, something to clear my head, and the first thought that came to mind was going to see the sisters. The idea felt comforting. I knew at least one of them would probably be home, and even if they were tired from work, they would still be happy to see me. So I decided to go. I shut down my word processor, stood up, and started getting ready. I changed my clothes, fixed my hair, and made myself look presentable enough to go out, even though it was already late. I remember moving slowly, not rushing like I was on autopilot. I put on my shoes, grabbed my coat, and checked the time. The whole process took about 30 minutes, nothing unusual, just the normal routine before heading out. Finally, I stood in my bedroom ready to leave. I reached out and wrapped my hand around the doorknob. That's when something strange happened, something I still can't fully explain even now. In an instant, like snapping your fingers, a wave of exhaustion hit me. It wasn't normal tiredness, not the kind you feel after a long day. It was sudden and overwhelming, like all the energy and motivation had been drained out of me at once. Every ounce of willpower I had to leave the house disappeared. I stood there for a moment confused, my hand still on the doorknob, trying to understand what I was feeling. I remember thinking it was odd, but I didn't panic. I just shrugged it off. I told myself I must be more tired than I realized. Maybe I'd been staring at that paper for too long. Maybe my body was telling me I needed rest. So I let go of the doorknob, took off my shoes, hung my coat back up, and decided to stay home. I went back to my room, crawled into bed, and fell asleep not long after. At the time, it felt like a small, unimportant decision, the kind you make without a second thought. The next morning changed everything. I woke up to a phone call. I could tell from the tone of the voice on the other end that something was wrong. Before I even fully understood the words, I was told that my friends had been in a horrible, violent car crash during the night. The older sister had died on impact. The younger sister was alive, but in extremely critical condition. I remember sitting there in silence after the call ended, staring at the wall, trying to process what I had just heard. It didn't feel real. It felt like someone else's tragedy, not something connected to my life. As more details came out, the reality became even harder to face. The younger sister had been working that night and didn't have a car. Her shift ended around 1 in the morning. The older sister, who was off that night, had gone to pick her up, just like she had done many times before. On the way home, they were involved in a devastating crash. The impact was so severe that the older sister died instantly from massive internal injuries and blood loss. She never had a chance. The younger sister survived, but barely. Her injuries were catastrophic. Her pelvis was shattered and she wouldn't walk again for over a year. Doctors later said that one of the reasons she survived at all was because she had fallen asleep in the car on the way home. Her body was more relaxed at the moment of impact, which may have reduced the severity of some of her injuries. Even so, her recovery was long, painful, and life-changing. What haunts me the most is realizing how close I came to being in that car. If I had gone to their house that night, like I planned, I would have been there when the older sister left to pick up the younger one. I would have gone with her. There is no doubt in my mind about that. I would have been sitting in that car when it crashed. Based on what happened, I likely would have died on impact, just like my friend. The thought of that still sends a chill through me, even all these years later. As if the situation wasn't already heartbreaking enough, there were details about the crash that made it even harder to accept. The older sister died gripping the steering wheel so tightly that when emergency responders arrived, they couldn't remove her hands. They had to break all her fingers just to free her from the wheel and get her out of the car. When I first heard that, it made my stomach turn. I couldn't stop picturing her final moments, the fear she must have felt, the instinctive grip she held as everything ended. There was another detail that still feels eerie and unsettling. The older sister had always said she wouldn't live to see 30. It was something she mentioned casually over the years, almost like a joke, but she said it often enough that people noticed. She died just 1 month short of her 30th birthday. Knowing that makes everything feel heavier, like there was some strange sense of inevitability surrounding her life and death. For a very long time after that, my mind was consumed by what-ifs. What if I hadn't felt that sudden exhaustion? What if I had opened the door and left anyway? What if I had ignored that feeling and gone to see them like I originally planned? I replayed that moment over and over in my head, standing in my room with my hand on the doorknob, unaware of how close I was to disaster. It felt surreal to think that such a small, simple moment could have such enormous consequences. I struggled with guilt, too. Guilt for surviving when my friend didn't. Guilt for being spared when the younger sister had to endure so much pain and loss. There were moments when I felt like I didn't deserve to be okay. Other times I felt terrified by how random life can be, how quickly everything can change without warning. One moment you're planning a casual visit to friends. The next, your entire world is shattered. That experience stayed with me for a very, very long time. It changed the way I thought about decisions, about intuition, about those strange moments when your body or mind seems to intervene without explanation. I became more aware of how fragile life is, how thin the line can be between ordinary and tragic. Sometimes late at night, I still think about that version of myself in college, standing at that door, completely unaware of how close I was to not having a future at all. Even now, years later, the memory hasn't faded. It doesn't hurt in the same sharp way it once did, but it lingers, like a shadow in the back of my mind. It reminds me that some moments don't make sense until much later, and some never make sense at all. All I know is that one unexplained feeling, one decision that seemed small and meaningless at the time, saved my life. And that knowledge has stayed with me, shaping the way I see the world ever since. Before I was even born, something strange happened in the house where I later grew up, a house that would quietly hold memories long before I was aware of them. My mother once told me this story so many times that it feels like a memory of my own, even though I wasn't there yet. She was young then, playing inside the house with my cousin, who was only 2 or 3 years old at the time. They were doing something simple, tossing an object back and forth, maybe playing fetch or some childish game. Nothing unusual at all. The house was calm, familiar, safe, the kind of place where nothing bad was supposed to happen. At one point, my mum threw the object down the hallway or into another room, and my cousin ran off to get it. A few moments passed, maybe only seconds, but suddenly he came running back toward her, screaming, not crying in a normal toddler way, but screaming in pure fear. My mum immediately knew something was wrong. She dropped everything and grabbed him, trying to calm him down, asking what had scared him so badly. Through his sobs, he managed to say that there was an old man standing at the door. My mum didn't hesitate. Holding my cousin close, she went straight to the front door and opened it, fully expecting to see someone there. But there was no one. The street was empty, quiet, just like it always was. No footsteps, no sound of someone walking away. Nothing that could explain what my cousin had seen. She checked around the doorway, looked outside again, and found nothing. Eventually, she convinced herself that maybe he had imagined it, or maybe shadows had scared him. Still, the fear he showed stayed with her. Later that day, my mum told my dad what had happened. She expected him to laugh it off or explain it away, but instead, his reaction made her even more uncomfortable. He went quiet for a moment, then admitted that he thought he had seen an old man as well, just the other day. The room must have felt heavy after that, the kind of silence that follows words you wish you hadn't heard. Seeing my mum panic, my dad quickly tried to smooth things over. He added, almost too casually, that he meant he saw an old man in the mirror, brushing it off like a joke, like he had simply caught his own reflection at the wrong angle. But even years later, my mum said she never fully believed that explanation. Time passed, and life moved on. I was born, grew up in that same house, completely unaware of any of this for a long time. The house never felt obviously haunted or frightening. It was just home. But looking back, there were moments, small ones, that felt a little off, though nothing dramatic enough to truly scare me as a child. Years later, when I was around 13 and my sister was about 10, we went on a bike ride through the woods next to our house. Those woods were a big part of our childhood. We rode through them often, knew the paths well, knew which areas were close to roads and which ones were deep enough that you felt completely cut off from everything else. On this particular day, we rode deeper than usual, following a familiar path that led into a quieter, more isolated part of the woods. At one point along the path, there was a bench. It stood out because of where it was placed. It wasn't near a road, not near a scenic overlook, and not in a place where people usually stopped. It felt oddly out of place. Sitting on that bench was an old man. He was quietly drawing, focused on whatever was on the paper in front of him. He didn't look threatening. If anything, he looked calm, peaceful, like he had been there for a long time. As we passed that spot, my sister suddenly fell off her bike. It wasn't a small fall. She hit the ground hard and immediately started crying, panicking more than the situation seemed to call for. She got up and ran, not even grabbing her bike, not even stopping to put her shoes back on properly. She just ran straight home, sobbing, leaving everything behind. That moment stuck with me, partly because it was so sudden and partly because it happened right there, right next to that bench. Because my sister ran off, I stayed behind for a moment to collect her bike and shoes. That's when I really noticed the old man. He was still sitting there, drawing, completely calm, not reacting at all to the chaos that had just happened. I remember thinking it was strange, but not in a frightening way. It almost felt like he belonged there, like he was part of the scenery. Later that day, after we were both home and my sister had calmed down, we talked about the bike ride with our parents. I mentioned the old man casually, saying something like how it must have been a nice view for him, sitting on that bench and drawing in the woods. My sister responded in a strange way. She said she didn't care about the bench or the view, but she also said something that made it clear she knew the old man had been there. She didn't seem surprised by him. It was like she had noticed him too, but didn't want to talk about it. That's when my dad looked confused. He asked what old man we were talking about. I assumed he was joking or pretending not to know, maybe trying to keep things light because my sister had been upset. I brushed it off at the time, but years later, the memory came back to me, sharper and more unsettling than before. I asked my dad about it again, expecting him to admit it was a joke. He didn't. He told me very clearly that he hadn't been joking. He said he never saw an old man on that bench. He remembered the bike ride, remembered my sister falling, but he swore there was no one sitting there. The way he said it, calm but certain, made my stomach drop. There was no smile, no hint of teasing. He truly believed what he was saying. A few years ago, long after we had grown up, I was walking my dog through those same woods. I decided to take a longer route than usual and follow the path that led to that spot, where I remembered the bench and the old man. As I walked, I tried to picture it clearly in my mind. When I reached the exact place where my sister had fallen all those years ago, something felt wrong. There was no bench. Not only was there no bench now, but there was no way there could have been one back then either. Tall, old trees stood exactly where the bench should have been. Their roots were thick and deep, clearly untouched for decades. There was no clearing, no sign that anything had ever been placed there. I walked up and down the path several times, checking nearby areas, convincing myself that maybe my memory was off. Maybe the bench had been a little further down, but it wasn't. I knew that spot. I was absolutely sure of it. That was where my sister fell. That was where I saw the old man sitting and drawing. And yet, there was no physical explanation for how a bench could have existed there, even 10 years earlier. I stood there for a long time, my dog pulling slightly at the leash, unaware of the thoughts racing through my head. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I misremembered. Maybe the bench had been temporary. Maybe it had been removed. But none of those explanations made sense when faced with those trees, solid and unmoving like they had always been there. Since then, the memory has never fully left me. It doesn't terrify me, not in a dramatic way, but it unsettles me deeply. It connects too many moments that shouldn't connect. My cousin seeing an old man before I was born. My parents both sensing something strange in the house. Me and my sister seeing an old man in the woods who apparently wasn't there. And finally, returning years later to find that the place itself couldn't support what I remembered seeing. I don't know what it means. I don't claim to have an answer. All I know is that it still creeps me out quietly in the back of my mind. Sometimes when I walk through the woods or think about that house, I wonder how many things we see that don't leave physical traces. How many moments exist only in memory, shared by some but invisible to others. And every time I think about that old man, sitting calmly and drawing in a place where no bench ever existed, I feel that same uneasy feeling I felt as a child, standing in the woods, knowing something wasn't quite right. My aunt bought my mother and father a peace lily as a wedding gift. She knew my father loved plants and landscaping, and she thought it would be something meaningful they could keep for years. Peace lilies are supposed to bloom regularly, usually once a year if they're cared for properly. My parents placed it in the house, watered it, gave it light, and did everything right. But after the wedding, it never bloomed. Years passed, and it stayed green but empty, like it was waiting for something. On my dad's side, my family used to be very close. We weren't just relatives who saw each other on holidays. We were involved in each other's lives. We visited often, talked regularly, and everyone came back home for family reunions. My grandparents had a large house, around 3,000 square feet, and when reunions happened, it was packed. There would easily be 30 or more family members inside at once. Kids running around, adults talking in groups, food everywhere. It felt warm and alive. My grandfather wasn't a particularly kind man, especially to my grandmother. He could be cold and distant and sometimes downright mean. Still, somehow, they made it work. My grandmother held the family together. She was the sweetest person you could imagine. Kind, patient, loving, always thinking of others before herself. She was the center of everything, the person everyone gravitated toward. When I was about 7 years old, my grandmother passed away. Her death didn't just take a person from our family. It took the glue that held everyone together. After she was gone, the family slowly fell apart. Some relatives drifted away. Some ended up struggling with drugs. Others moved far away and stopped talking to anyone outside their small circle. The big reunions stopped happening. Conversations became rare. It felt like something essential had broken. In her will, my grandmother left the house to the family. My grandfather was getting older and couldn't keep up with such a big place anymore, so he sold it to my father for $2. It wasn't about money, it was about keeping the house in the family. My grandfather moved in with my aunt, but he would still come by the house from time to time. One thing my dad noticed was that my grandfather never went into the living room. He would step inside the house, walk around, but always avoided that space. Eventually, my dad asked him why. My grandfather's answer was simple and unsettling. He said he didn't feel right in there. He said my grandmother watched him when he was in that room. He even used her name. Considering how he treated her when she was alive, it made sense that the idea of her watching him would make him uncomfortable. At the time, we brushed it off. We told ourselves he was just getting old, maybe a little confused. We didn't notice anything strange ourselves, so we didn't think much about it. There was another strange detail we didn't connect until later. The peace lily, that hadn't bloomed since my parents' wedding, suddenly bloomed the exact day my grandmother died. It was unexpected and full, like it had been waiting years for that moment. Then, just as suddenly, it went back to not blooming again. As the years passed, my grandfather's health declined. He had multiple heart attacks, one after another. After the third or fourth one in a short span of time, it almost felt routine. Around this same period, my parents divorced. My father moved into my grandparents' old house and started remodeling it. That's when things began to happen, things we couldn't easily explain. The first thing my dad noticed was footsteps. He would be in his bedroom late at night and hear footsteps outside on the wraparound porch. The strange part was that he believed he was the only one home at the time. This happened 2 or 3 times. After the first time, he started keeping my brother's rifle in his closet, just in case. Another thing happened in the laundry room. We had a cart with coat hangers hanging from it. One day, while my dad was home alone, he saw the hangers swinging violently, like someone had just shoved them. There was no breeze, no open windows, no explanation. We also had 2 Dalmatians. They were calm dogs, not aggressive, and usually spent evenings sitting quietly at our feet while we watched TV. Every once in a while, though, they would suddenly jump up, run behind the love seat, and start growling. Their hair would stand up along their backs as they stared toward the top of the stairs. The love seat faced the exit of the living room, which also happened to be the base of the staircase leading to the second floor. Whatever they were reacting to, we couldn't see it. At one point, we finished the basement and turned it into a workout area. Around that time, my dad had a friend staying with us who was also going through a divorce. His daughters came to visit, and one day, Both sets of parents went out to get groceries. Since I was the oldest kid in the house, I was left in charge. I was downstairs working out with my headphones on when I suddenly heard running above me. I pulled my headphones off and clearly heard small footsteps running across the floor above, which would have been my dad's bedroom on the first floor. I went upstairs, planning to tell the youngest daughter she shouldn't be running in the house. But when I got there, the room was empty. I checked the second floor and found my brother and both girls sitting in the den, playing cards. I asked the youngest if she had been running downstairs. She said no. She said they had been playing cards for the past 45 minutes. My brother and her sister backed her up. They hadn't left the room. There was no explanation for what I heard. Things stayed quiet for a while after that. Then my brother and I went to visit our mom for the weekend. When we came back, my dad asked us if we had stopped by the house while we were gone. We hadn't. He told us that before leaving for work, he had vacuumed the upstairs office and pushed the desk chair neatly under the desk. When he came home later, the chair was pulled out and facing the door that led to the upper porch. The blinds on that door were wide open. This bothered him because my dad had a habit of always closing blinds before leaving a room. He also pointed out that there were no footprints in the freshly vacuumed carpet. That shouldn't have been possible. This happened more than once. My dad also told us a story about my grandmother from her final days in the hospital. The nurse would try to close the blinds in her room, but my grandmother always protested. She liked having the sun on her face. One evening while we were gone, my dad was cooking dinner with both dogs sitting next to him. Suddenly, there was a loud thump upstairs. He described it as sounding like someone dropped a large pack of water bottles from chest height onto the floor. The noise terrified the dogs. My dad went upstairs to check, expecting to find something knocked over. Nothing was out of place. Thinking someone might have broken in, he grabbed the rifle and searched the house. He checked every room, every closet, under all 3 beds upstairs, and even the attic. He found no one. The most frightening experience, though, happened when I had a friend over for the night. I had been telling him about the strange things happening in the house. Earlier in the evening, I jokingly hid from him and whispered his name in a creepy voice to mess with him. We laughed about it and moved on. Later that night, we were watching Spaceballs in the basement. When the movie ended, my friend went upstairs to get some water. When he came back down, he stopped and looked at me, confused. He asked how I got downstairs so fast. I told him I never went upstairs. He laughed and said I did the creepy voice thing again. Then he saw my face. He panicked and jumped onto the couch farthest from the stairs. After calming down, he told me what happened. He said he thought he saw me upstairs. He said he talked to it. He even asked where the water was and got the correct answer. I was about 17 at the time and thought I was fearless, but every hair on my body stood up. My eyes watered. I kept glancing at my friend, wondering if he was messing with me, but he never took his eyes off the stairs. Neither of us slept that night. Not long after that, my grandfather's health took another turn. We expected him to recover like before. One morning at breakfast, my dad said we should probably go visit him in the hospital. When we asked if things were worse, he pointed to the peace lily in the kitchen. It was starting to bloom again. That night, the flower fully bloomed. That same night, my grandfather's lungs filled with fluid, and he passed away. The peace lily died within days. Eventually, we sold the house and moved into a new one. The strange things stopped. The dogs no longer barked at nothing. No footsteps, no loud thumps, no moving furniture. Later, my dad told me the new owners had seen things. One daughter thought she saw a woman in a bedroom. Another saw a woman behind her door. Their description matched my grandmother almost perfectly. I haven't experienced anything since. I live far away now. I don't feel watched. I don't feel afraid. Everything seemed to start with the remodeling and end when we left. I don't try to think too deeply about it anymore. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just pass through you, they stayed. Every story you heard tonight was real. Real people, real moments, and in every one of them, something went wrong, or almost did. If you want to keep exploring the stories that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Shadow Archives.